All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee. This is David, and here's the thing. Every time there is a new encounter story here ready for you on Pacwest Bigfoot, you'll get a notification. I'll put up a little post with a nice little image on it, and you'll be able to click on that link and listen in. Just so you all know, I am moving over into the Monster X radio family. So I'm going to be over there with all of the Pacwest Bigfoot encounters. You can read them on the monsterxradio.com website. You can also find my own playlist, if you will, inside of the Monster X Radio YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find me there as well. The reason for the move is basically this. I am just really good friends with Gunner over there, and I've met Shane, and I really enjoyed Thomas, and I just really wanted to be a part of something that was just awesome. Over there, you're going to get all kinds of really cool stuff, from interviews through the podcast and the YouTube channel, all the way to live updates. Shane's going to be bringing updates and stuff of his research out there around Olympic part of Washington, the Olympic Peninsula and things like that. Basically his kind of wanderings all over, not to mention he's going to be interviewing other people doing research, which is kind of cool. Then you've got Gunner, who is out there doing the Monster X Radio podcast as well, and he is out there interviewing people, eyewitnesses, and diving into deep conversations, and as well as Thomas. Thomas Seawood is part of the First Nations, and he really dives into everything Sasquatch, the history of it, and just a lot of great information from him on his part of Monster X Radio, his little neck of the woods in there called Sasquatch Island. So basically, Pacwest Bigfoot is going to be more of the entertainment, of course, for the site overall, where I bring some of these based on true Bigfoot encounter stories and turn them into campfire stories just for you. I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to continue as David over here at Pacwest Bigfoot. You will find the stories that you can read on pacwestbigfoot.com. I'll always keep the stories there to be read, but everything that you're going to be able to listen to will be now on Monster X Radio. So get over there, and I'm going to ask you guys real kindly, please, get on over there, subscribe to the new channel where you can find Pacwest Bigfoot. You can find me on Monster X Radio here on YouTube. And don't forget, Gunner and them, they have a free monthly giveaway from the blog if you want to sign up there. And yes, Gunner is Sasquatch coffee, which we're going to take a sip of right now. So let's clear the old throat and let's get going. Some of you guys have been waiting for the second part to that Christmas cabin encounter story that I got from Caleb. Well, guess what? His sister Sara has sent me in a little bit of what happened, and here we go with Sara and the Bigfoot. My little brother Caleb and his wife must have met a nice Bigfoot, because that evening, when I finally realized what was visiting me at night, well, that Bigfoot was not wanting to play games. That's for sure. It started late winter, and if I recall correctly, it was late January, early February, when this dangerous monster, would come knocking on my window late at night and harass my other brother, and even try to, well, I believe that day, try to take me. They're dangerous, and they need to be taken seriously. Here is my story. Holding back the years. I was 11 years old, and my brother was around 14. And little man, well, he was barely 5 years old when something terrifying would happen at the cabin. Well, back then, it was our house, our home. I remember the night it all started, the night that I saw the green eyes in the forest outside my window. It was snowing, one of those once-a-year lucky dog day or two where we got a few more inches. It did not snow for Christmas that year, so this was nice. Late, but nice. I was heading to bed. It would be the first night where I would have my own bedroom. See, up to that point, I'd been sharing a room with my older brother, while my dad added on another room to the log home. Finally, it was finished, and I was finally free to hang out in my own room and do my own things without my big brother bugging me. That night, the night of the crazy eye shine, I had finished my chore of washing dishes in record time. Of course, it was because I would go and enjoy my new room and fix things up a bit more that night, making it truly mine. I spent the evening putting up some pictures my mother had framed for me, a poster of my favorite band at the time on the back of my door, and set up my boom box, we called them back then, on my oversized nightstand. Around 9 or so, I called it a night. Being Friday, I was allowed to stay up until 10, but I wanted to listen to the radio and read a book with just my little bed lamp on and relax in my new and glorious room. I heard the others turn in, and my mom and dad headed off to bed. I turned off my lamp around 10 o'clock, give or take a few minutes or so. I lay down and let my eyes adjust to the night sky outside my rather large windows. It wasn't moments before, and I could see the moon's ambient light and the beautiful green lights moving around the trees outside. And that's what caught my attention suddenly. Green lights? I sat up and watched as a pair of green lights seemed to whiz around the trees in and out, all the while disappearing here and there, only to return bright and twinkling again. At first I thought they were bugs flashing in the moonlight, but for some reason deep down inside I knew they were not bugs at all. They were uniform as they moved, and as I walked closer to the window, I realized the green lights were eyeshine. They were there just beyond the small yard where the forest took over. A large shadowy figure was moving about from tree to tree. I could see the outline of this thing clearly, and it was tall, massive, wide, and moved like nothing I'd ever seen. Anything ever. Like a large black ghost against the moonlit night, the eyes seemed to float around like lightning bugs as this massive thing moved around through the trees. Finally, after watching this thing for about a minute or two, it stopped. The dark shape seemed to be facing me, at least in my direction. And those green eyes still glinted and shined in the dark. Then a scream so loud it woke the house came from outside. Then it seemed to turn, walk off, and the eyeshine disappeared. I told my parents, but to my surprise, my dad shrugged it off as a bear in a tree climbing down and running off into the woods. My mother, on the other hand, well, she was quiet the whole time. Coyote in the winter. After that night, weird sounds could be heard every night or so. My dad believed it to be a coyote or a pack of them running around, but my mother, on the other hand, well, she was a bit worried after that scream outside my window that night. She knew something was up, and shortly after that first week of hearing Dad's so-called coyote, she started her own investigation into what was making those eerie sounds in the night. And they did. They kept coming. By Christmas, the house was completed. My dad actually said aloud that on the seventh day he rested as he fell on the couch next to the fireplace. He had just finished the back deck in a small smokehouse that he'd been working on for a few months in between work and being a great dad. He was soon using the smokehouse for some fish he caught, and he purchased a whole bunch of meat, beef, I think it was, and decided to try it out one evening and let it smoke overnight. Well, that was a mistake, my mother believed. It was Saturday, and I remember that for sure as we were in the house watching some cartoons, when all I heard was yelling. It was my dad. He sounded irate, to say the least. Actually, he had to apologize to Mom and us for a word or two that slipped out that we all laughed at when we heard them. But he had reason to be mad. The smokehouse door was almost all but torn off its hinges, and the meat, well, most of it at least, was gone. Something had got in, took or ate most of the meat Dad had put in there. Fortunately, it was not all of it. Some were left, but that was thrown out just in case. However, nonetheless, it was all but gone. At first, he thought it was a bear, and a bear could pull off the door. What was funny was that no piece had been chewed on that were left behind on the floor after further inspection by my mother. Whatever animal it was, it literally carried the meat off. It could not have been coyote or bear or anything like that, my mother would insist. My father shrugged his shoulders and got to work fixing the door and smoking some more meat. The next day, though, my dad was in a smoked meat heaven, and nothing broke in, and all the new meat was there. The barking. Still the noises came, and still my dad called it coyote. It was not until January that my mother would learn that it was not a coyote, a bear, or a wolf for that matter. It was something else, something she knew of, something her people knew was real and really dangerous. See, my mother was Native American, almost full-blooded at that. Her people were from the northeast part of the United States originally. As a matter of fact, one of her forefathers was there at Plymouth and at the fort on a few different occasions, she would tell us. The one thing she never shared with us was the beast, the Bigfoot or Sasquatch that roams the wild throughout North America. She had been told stories and warned about these things as a child. After the smokehouse, she had a feeling that what had stolen the meat and was making all those weird howls and sounds in the night was a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch. It was the barking that would have her throwing fits with my dad and telling us about a creature she had never seen before but was warned about, finally. She was out that day on one of her walks. There was a trail above the house along the hillside. It ran for nearly a mile or so from east to west. It was small, more of a game trail than a hiking trail. She was not gone long that morning before she came running back and through the back door, almost out of breath. We were at school at the time, but the conversation we heard later on that night. She told my dad about the barking that happened at first and then seeing someone along the ridge in the shadows. She was walking at a pretty good pace, nearing a sort of bend that marked about the halfway point of the trail. She suddenly stopped after a strange feeling had come over her. It was a feeling of being watched, or worse yet, followed. This is when she heard a bark, not a dog bark, not even close to anything like that, she'd say. It was more like a giant person was trying to make a barking sound. It was deep, rough, and came as a massive shock to her. Again, there was another bark as she tried to see past some of the thick, high brush and trees where it came from. That's when she saw what looked like a large, dark, shadowy silhouette of a person turn and disappear even deeper into the already dark forest that early morning. My mother said she ran at that point all the way home. My dad and older brother did head out that evening, guns in hand, to take a look up and around the ridgeline above the house. Well, log home, if you will. They saw nothing. However, my older brother did feel like they were being watched, but my dad shrugged it off and again blamed it on known wildlife. However, later that night, I heard him out on the porch with my mother mumbling about the howling that had come again that same evening. And I swear I heard the word Bigfoot blurted out by my dad. They were out there for a while, and the hollering got closer to the house. I could tell I had my window cracked open. Eventually, however, the sounds died off, and my mom and dad must have gone off to bed. About 3 hours later, I woke up to a horrible, putrid smell in my room. I almost started gagging. I got up, turned on the lights, and started looking for what could be causing the smell. The closer I got to the window, the stronger the smell was. I looked up and realized that my window was still cracked a bit. Talk about wetting your pants. The second I reached for that window to shut it, a large and massive black shadow moved away from it, letting the moonlight back in. I screamed twice. I told my dad over and over what I'd noticed. No, I did not see a face or anything that would say for sure that I'd seen a Bigfoot, but it was massive and blocked all of the light from coming in that window. And as I said before, they were pretty big windows for a bedroom. Bear. That is what my dad called it. It's a bear. And that was the end of it. Suffice it to say, I slept in the living room by the fireplace that night, and my big brother camped out on my bedroom floor for almost a week after that night, just to learn more. Valentine's Day. A couple of weeks passed since the window ordeal. Things were quiet once again. No crazy sounds could be heard, and the green eye shine was gone as well. I think by that point my mom and I started feeling better, even safer. Of course, there were a couple arguments before that point between my mom and dad. She was sure it was a Sasquatch she'd seen and heard, but my father was skeptical. Okay, he did not really believe at all that what she saw was some crazy, made-up monster that lurked in the woods of North America. See, to him, the Willow Creek footage was a man in a suit, and the figure my mother saw was either a large bear or a person lost and far off the Pacific Crest Trail. And that was all there was to it. But his mind would change soon enough. It was actually right about Valentine's Day when things would suddenly go bad, real bad. That year was Friday, the day after the Day of Hearts fell upon. I remember it well, and not just because of the incident, but because it was the day I met my future husband. It was crazy that a new family had moved into the area that day at school, and they had a boy my age named Ryan. Nobody knew he was coming, so he received no Valentine's Day cards in his little pouch we'd all made and taped to the front of our school desk. So I made him one. That afternoon, when the last bell sounded, I walked over before heading out to the bus and handed him a card I had made in a rush, of course. The funny thing was, he made one for me too. Suffice it to say, I was on that bus with a big smile and waving at him as we all pulled out and headed home. Saturday, I woke up and, like my mother loved to do, went for a walk on the trail. I was up and out the door with my Walkman on, one of the very first ones that were radio only at the time. I was listening as best I could to a top 40 channel with those horrible earphones back then. But I would be glad they were horrible. Otherwise, I would not have heard the barking that came from ahead and from the south of me. It was a sharp but deep sounding bark. My mother had tried her best to describe it, and now I knew what she was trying to get across. It was different, something I'd never heard before or since, thank goodness. But I heard it that morning, and unfortunately the barking sound came intermittently from directly ahead of me, and what seemed to be about 30-40 yards to the south of me. That was the direction of my house. I stopped, turned off the Walkman, and started listening to any other sounds of movement. To the south of me, I suddenly heard something heavy walking. The thudding, you could almost feel it as it moved just out of sight in the thick of the trees and high brush. It was staying out of sight, I knew, on purpose. I could feel it. I started to turn and walk back the way I came when I fell hard. When I fell, and I fell hard at the sound of a scream that literally came. It came so loudly it turned me pale. My mind started reeling around and around. It was ear-piercing, to say the least, and which now came from in back of me, from the direction I had come originally. I got up and started walking faster towards the south, knowing that eventually it would basically run into a road. The trail might end, but a couple of times me and my big brother had walked all the way there, and I knew it pretty well. Another scream came, and I started trotting at that point, being careful, however, not to fall and trip over anything that could cause me to hurt myself and leave me unable to elude whatever it was, now, it seemed, either chasing me or simply toying with me. I heard it to the south of me crashing through the woods, barking again. This time I could see better as the trees thinned out and the high brush too. I watched this monster of a thing, this massive and dark and hairy legend my mother was telling me, or telling me and my father about, moving. It was, it was, it had black hair, long hair, and this thing moved swiftly, so swiftly and fast. All I could tell was that this thing was a monster, a real life Bigfoot creature, and not just one, but now two of them were chasing me, or shadowing me along the trail. I was petrified. I started yelling for my mom and dad, and I didn't care if these things heard me or not. Again a scream, and again I saw this thing moving in and out of the trees. Then I heard another, this time coming from the direction I was basically running in. I stopped to listen again if the other was still close behind me. I heard nothing for a moment and started running back, eastward, towards the house. I felt as though I could cut off the trail and start heading down towards the house, and so I did. Unfortunately, not halfway to safety, I ran smack into an open area that literally had within it a large and massive Bigfoot, staring right at me from the opposite side. I could smell it on the wind, and its growling started up, and the tears started welling in my eyes. I thought I was about to die. Then its upper body turned as it too heard a scream from the east of us, a scream that was not from its kind, but mine. It was my mother. She came running out of the tree line and right for me, and as she did, this massive animal, started running at her. It literally ran her down, knocking her to the ground, and hard, as it then kept running up the hillside and disappearing, screaming all the way. It happened so fast I could not actually grasp what just happened, and I was in shock. I fell down next to my mother and simply started crying. My mother, she was out cold. The next thing I knew, moments later, I heard two shots, gunshots, followed by a howl that seemed to tell me that one of them was hit. It was the one that had run my mother over, I hoped. Moments later, I was startled as my older brother and dad came running out into the clearing, and my big brother picked me up. My dad did the same for my mother, and they carried us home. Gone. She was okay. A couple of broken ribs was all. Oh, a nice little bump on the noggin. She did suffer a concussion too, but with some time and prayer, she got better. My dad made it the subject of his life from that day forward to make it all up to her for not believing her. He'd seen one of them and fired at it. He missed, however, but my brother swears he didn't. He said he got that thing in the shoulder and it was clean through. My parents never told a soul, though. Back then, they'd probably have been laughed at out of town when they were in it. We still lived there until we all married and went off to school. My parents, though, lived there all their lives. Never again did they see or hear the Bigfoot around the property. But after years of nobody around, I think they came back. Or a new group found that place, as Caleb made known to us all that Christmas. But that is our story. Thanks, Sara.